Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night in a completely dark room? Not the kind of dark when a lamp is glowing somewhere or light is slipping through the curtains. I mean the kind of darkness where you wake up and for a moment, you honestly have no idea where you are. Maybe you reach toward the nightstand and miss it, or maybe you try to stand up and suddenly realize you don't know where exactly the edge of the bed is. I recently did that, so that's why I'm chuckling. Your eyes are open, but they're not helping much. And for a few seconds, you just lie there, waiting for your vision to adjust. And little by little begins to appear shapes. The outline of a dresser, the faint glow of the alarm clock, the doorway across the room. Nothing in the room has changed, but your eyes just needed time to adjust to the light. And in a strange way, that experience is not so different from what the Apostle Paul is talking about when he writes to the church at Ephesus. Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Because there's a kind of darkness that has nothing to do with the sun going down. It's the darkness of assumption, darkness of thinking we already see clearly. And sometimes we don't even realize we are living in the darkness. And Paul writes, for once you were darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. Walk as children of light. The kind of darkness Paul is talking about has nothing to do with the sun going down. You know the kind he means. It's the darkness of thinking we already see clearly. The darkness of assumption, the darkness of being absolutely sure we understand all of the world around us, the darkness of prejudice and stereotypes, the darkness of greed and scarcity, the darkness of fear and despair, and even the darkness of shame and guilt. And honestly, most of the time, we do not even know we're in it. That's why the words from Paul hit so directly. He writes to the church, for once you were darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. Walk as children of light. Did you notice what he said? He did not say you used to live in darkness. He says something much more personal. You were darkness. That lands a little harder. And then he follows it with something just as bold. Now you are light. Not you visit the light on Sunday mornings, not you try to behave like light sometimes. You are light. Paul is talking about identity. And in the gospel reading, Jesus and his disciples are walking along and they pass a man who has been blind since birth. And the disciples ask what sounds like a thoughtful theological question, Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents that he was born blind? But if we're honest, it's also a very human question. Because we like a tidy world, don't we? We want a universe where everything makes sense. If something bad happens, we want a reason for it. Someone to blame, some explanation that helps us feel like the world is still under control. So the disciples try to fit this man's life into a familiar religious formula. Blindness must equal punishment. Someone must have done something wrong. And Jesus simply says, neither. Just like that, the whole framework collapses. Jesus refuses the idea that disability equals punishment. Jesus refuses the idea that suffering means God is assigning blame. Jesus refuses the idea that illness means God is casting judgment. Instead of turning the man into a theological puzzle, Jesus sees him as a person. And then Jesus does something honestly a little strange. He spits on the ground, makes mud, and rubs it on the man's eyes. It's earthly, it's messy, it's not very dignified. Apparently, healing is not always neat and tidy. What's fascinating in this story is that the only person who ends up seeing clearly is the one who started out blind. Everyone else struggles. The neighbors argue about what they're seeing. The religious leaders are so certain they're right that they refuse to see what is right in front of them. Even the man's parents hold back because they are afraid of the religious system. But the man who is healed, his understanding grows step by step in this story. At first, he says, the man called Jesus. Later, he says, he must be a prophet. And by the end of the story, he says, Lord, I believe. His sight opens in stages. That feels honest to me, because most of us do not suddenly wake up one morning with perfect clarity about faith, about justice, and about discipleship. Usually it happens slowly. We see a little bit more this year than we did last year, and hopefully a little bit more next year than we do today. Sometimes learning to see differently begins very early in life. If you step into my office, you'll see all of these lovely pictures and books from Fred Rogers, who I absolutely adore. And Fred Rogers once, you probably all know him as Mr. Rogers, I'll just say that. He once shared a story about something his mother taught him when he was a child. Whenever there was a frightening event on the news, a disaster, an accident, something that made the world feel scary, young Fred would become very anxious as a child, like many children do. He worried about what all of that meant on the TV. And his mother would say something simple but profound. She would tell him, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. Firefighters running toward danger, neighbors opening their homes, doctors and nurses working through the night, strangers offering kindness to people they've never met. In other words, she was teaching him where to look. Because where we focus our attention shapes what we believe about the world around us. If we only look at chaos, the world will always look hopeless. But when we begin to see the helpers, the healers, the people bringing the light into dark places, suddenly we realize something else is happening too. Light is already breaking through, and that's a little like what happens in today's gospel story. Everyone else is focused on the wrong question. Who sinned? But Jesus shifts their vision entirely. Instead of looking for blame, he reveals the work of God. Instead of diagnosing the darkness, he brings light. Faith can be like that. Very few people suddenly see everything clearly all at once. Most of us grow into clarity. We see something about Jesus this year that we didn't understand 10 years ago. We notice injustice where once we overlooked it. We develop compassion when we did not have that before. And we are more generous than we have ever been. Little by little, our eyes adjust to the light. And that's exactly what's happening in today's gospel. The man who was healed begins simply with these observations. The man called Jesus, then later, he must be a prophet. And finally, he says, Lord, I believe. His sight just didn't open once. It kept opening. A few years ago, I was told a story that has stuck with me. A friend of mine from work told me about one of his friends who said, I used to think I wasn't prejudiced at all. He said he prided himself on being what he called colorblind. He thought that meant he was doing everything right. But over time, he started listening more closely to friends whose life experiences were very different from his own. He heard stories about job interviews that didn't go the same way, or traffic stops that felt threatening, housing opportunities that mysteriously disappeared. And one day he said to his friend, "I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't hateful, I was just unaware." And that realization changed him, because light doesn't just expose cruelty. Sometimes light exposes blind spots we didn't even know that we had. You see it in the ordinary life too. Sometimes it happens in families. You think you understand someone you love, you think you know their complete story, and then one day they tell you something they have been carrying for years. And suddenly you realize, I didn't see that at all. Or maybe it happens at work. You assume someone is quiet because they are disengaged with everything. And then you discover they are the ones that are holding the whole team together behind the scenes. Or maybe it even happens in church. We assume everyone feels welcome until someone finally says, "Actually, I haven't always felt that way." Light can be uncomfortable, but it's also freeing. My favorite line in the entire gospel story is an incredibly simple. The man says, "One thing I do know, though I was blind, now I see." That's it. He doesn't explain the mechanics of the miracle. He doesn't defend the theological system. He doesn't just tell the truth about what is happening to him. He just puts it out there. Not because he is wrong, but because his story disrupts the certainty of these other people. And it still happens today. Whenever people begin telling the truth about injustice, about harm, about exclusion, someone eventually says, "Why are we stirring these things up?" That's what the Pharisees were doing, saying to him. But the light always stirs things up, doesn't it? And now he can see. Paul says something to the Ephesians that sounds almost like the alarm clock going off. "Sleeper, awake! Rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." This is not a lullaby. It's a wake-up call. Because when you are asleep, you do not know you are asleep. Cultural habits feel normal. Blind spots feel invisible. Comfort feels like clarity until suddenly the light comes on. And when it does, we have a choice. We can insist, "I see just fine." Or we can pray, "Lord, open my eyes." Here's the good news in this story. When the man finally speaks truth, when he refuses to pretend he is still blind, the religious authorities throw him out. They exclude him. But the story does not end there. The gospel says something beautiful. Jesus goes and finds him. After the arguments, after rejection, after all the dust settles, Jesus seeks him out and asks gently, "Do you believe?" Not as an exam, but as an invitation. And the man says, "Lord, I believe." In the United Church of Christ, we often say, God is still speaking. And if that's true, and I believe it is, then it is also meaning that we are still learning, still growing, still having our vision corrected. Walking in the light means being willing to say, "Maybe I didn't see that before. Maybe there's more for me to learn. Maybe God is opening my eyes in a new way." And that's not failure. That's discipleship. So maybe the prayer today is very simple. Not, "Lord, make us right," but, "Lord, help us see." Help us see the people we have overlooked. Help us see the places where healing is needed. Help us see the grace already moving in the world. Because Paul says something remarkable. You are the light now. Not someday, now. So let's wake up, let's open our eyes, and let's walk in the light today. Amen.